What's going on, everyone? In this hopefully quick little video, I wanted to explain some concepts on nutrient timing and specifically with glycogen replenishment. So you see I have three topics here, but this video can get kind of long if I went through all of them. So it will mainly be the second one here, glycogen replenishment, which is bolded, and a little bit of the third part, which is just pre and post. I have wadding down here because this is actually from a seminar that was presented to a CrossFit gym. So of course I had this tailored to them, but in general this is going to apply to most strength athletes, so powerlifters, weightlifters, bodybuilders, and CrossFitters. It wouldn't change too much, just the specifics would, but most of this is going to be more conceptual than actual like grams and timing specific amounts. Of course, I need to work with someone to get that kind of dialed in. But again, this is just a short little tidbit of a seminar that I give, and these seminars kind of get a little bit more in detailed and just in general better as I do them. So it's about 70 slides, but this specifically again wanted to talk about some nutrient timing stuff, very basic foundational stuff, only 5 or 6 slides here, but I'm going to get pretty in-depth into kind of, again, the conceptual reasons of why we do stuff with the glycogen replenishment, and then also practical applications of how that helps us out. So I always kind of start off with most of my talks, and it's really important for nutrient timing as far as the importance of it, right? So kind of its magnitude in your results, because it's obviously going to really depend on a few of these factors. So this was made by my brosif, Alan Aragon, and adapted from probably a lot of other people. So you see Precision Nutrition kind of just stole this and luckily cited them. I cited Alan. So again, I'm just kind of using this. I think it's a great way to kind of look at the spectrum of how important it is depending on your goals and the timing of the year and all that stuff. So kind of follow these. I'll start with the red boxes here. So again, up top you see not very important for these people, possibly important for these people, and it's really important for these people, right? So we'll start with the red. So the two reds here are just mainly the time that you're training. So if you see the big difference here, not very important if you're going to train for less than an hour, okay? So again, that kind of goes along with the severity of your goals. Most people who want to become a national champion, compete at the highest level of their sport, are not going to be training in less than an hour in a day. So they're probably going to fit in this kind of section here, exhaustive continuous training for longer than an hour, and then sometimes even over in here with the 2 hours. But I think that's probably less common for most people that I work with. So again, you can kind of see based on the severity of your goals here where you're going to kind of fit in this first part. So again, if you're training 3 times a week, full body splits, 3 or 4 exercises, not competitive, probably is not going to be a huge impact on your performance. But as you get into longer training sessions, more higher severity of your goals, it's going to make a difference. That's just kind of what is said in these little blue sections I have boxed off here. So goals that don't include extreme muscle gain or extreme fat loss. Again, if you're trying to get a little bit better, if you're past your competitive stage and you're just trying to be healthy for general reasons, probably not that important. If you have more competitive aspirations, it's going to be possibly important. And again, the more competitive you want to be, it's probably going to come down to really important for. And then lastly over here, just the one green section, which is competition time, is minimal between events. I had this in green because, again, was at a CrossFit gym where if you're not familiar with it, most of their competitions, they have several like mini workouts in a day. So they may have like one workout that lasts 7 minutes, and then an hour do a workout that lasts 4 minutes, and then an hour, then do a workout that lasts 30 minutes. So replenishing glycogen and nutrient timing is really, really important for that. And we'll go into actually why that is. So I'll skip over this. Again, muscle protein synthesis, just kind of want to make it quickly through this as quickly as we can. So before we actually get to this part, I just added this section in. So I just made this a couple minutes ago. So hopefully this comes out well in my brain. I don't have too good of art skills, but I think it's, again, conceptually important to understand why what glycogen is, kind of why we need it, and all those things. So glycogen is nothing more than the stored form of carbohydrate in your muscle cells and also liver. We're just going to go into muscle cells in this little representation here, again, to save some time and to make it as simple as possible, with also you fully understanding what's going on. Okay, so again, glycogen is just, I'm gonna do this Khan Academy style. Hopefully you guys like that. Stored carbohydrate, right? That's all it is. So again, that will be predominantly stored in the muscle tissue and a little bit in the liver. So again, these signify right here, these little blue cones are going to be muscle. So again, let me Khan Academy some more. This will definitely take longer than I anticipated, but you guys will get it. So these here will represent all of the muscles, these little blue sections. And this will make more sense as we go through it. Okay, but all three of those would be muscle cells, of course. So what we're doing, if we kind of start over here in this full section, again, this would assume you haven't trained in the past 24, 48 hours, you're eating plenty of food, your glycogen should be full or pretty damn close to full, which means that you've ate enough carbohydrates to recover from your training. This is kind of always the goal, to get back to this. And I'll also note before I start, this is clearly oversimplification of something being full, half empty, and nearly empty. In real world, it would be like full, and then 97%, and 87%, and then right, so on and so forth. But anyway, so we're starting off here, and then of course, let's kind of just go into a hypothetical scenario of what would happen while you're training. So say, you know, Monday morning, you're full from your weekend, you didn't do any training, and then you come in Monday morning and you train for an hour and a half. Okay, so what will happen here, again, overly simplistically, is you're going to move a lot of these carbohydrates that were stored into the blood to be used for energy. Okay, so that's why you kind of say that like carbohydrates are used for energy. Okay, so that's what's going to happen there. So again, overly simplistic here, but that would shuttle a lot of those carbohydrates into the blood. These bloods would make it useful for energy to expend during that training session. And again, this is going to be predominantly for the high intensity exercises, which is going to be what most of the people that I work with are going to be doing most of the time. Okay, so you have these carbohydrates removed from the muscle cell and also from the liver in some instances into the blood. Okay, so the goal then is to reach this full potential again before we train. But let's go and say what happens if we don't do that. Okay, so say this is just train plus a lack of carbohydrates, and say you try to go in without those, you know, the full amount of carbohydrates to get you back to a full storage here into say Tuesday morning, and now this is your Tuesday session, you're half empty, and the same exact thing would happen. So you would exercise again, which means you would move more of these carbohydrates into the muscle cell, into the blood. And that same thing would occur, right? You would train because you have to get that glucose out of the muscle cell to get into the blood to use for energy. Train right here, and say again, you didn't again go lack of carbohydrates. You go into your Wednesday session, again, kind of nearly empty. Of course, this is oversimplification. It would not happen this quickly, but it helps from a visual standpoint. And again, the reason why we don't want this kind of section over here, this nearly empty, I don't really have any data on me now, but you don't have to be completely removed from glycogen. And actually, that'd be probably hard to ever happen, but you don't have to be super low in glycogen to actually have a decrease in performance. It'll probably mainly be the first thing you'll notice is just a rate of perceived exertion will increase. So maybe you're capable of doing the same amount of work, but it's going to seem much, much harder. And I wish I had some data on me, but it's probably less than 50%. It probably would even start to happen here in this half empty stage. And again, don't freak out and think that you're going to go from full to half empty in one day. You know, you probably have to train really, really, really hard and eat like no carbohydrates for that to happen. So again, this is kind of a oversimplification of how this would occur, but it definitely could occur with chronic training and lack of carbohydrate, or again, if that training was super high intensity and even kind of high volume that could occur. Okay, but again, I think this just kind of helps some representation of what we have there. Okay, so let's go back on all of this, kind of delete all of those, that whole kind of process there, and now talk about what would kind of be the ideal scenario. Okay, so say again, if you were here full of glycogen on Monday, you went and trained really, really hard. Instead of this lack of carbs here, let's say you actually had, let's say, enough carbs. Okay, but that same thing would occur, so you'd still have this happen. You'd still use that for energy. Whoa! Still use those, all that glucose moving out of the muscle cell. Okay, but then when we actually would eat, so I'd probably need another section in here, but again, you would eat some carbohydrates, hopefully carbohydrates. You don't want to really convert anything else into glucose. You could do that, but not super efficient. So say you actually ate some carbs, let's just have say this MB up here as our imaginary intestine. And then of course the goal would be then to have that move into the blood here. Okay, so say we ate some carbs, it moved into the blood there. Let's make that easier to see. Again, the MB would just be like, let's say some oatmeal moving into the blood there. And then finally it would move, let's say, back into this cell. Again, because you're kind of half depleted. Let's say that would happen there. And then eventually, if you ate enough carbohydrate, you would be back here. So again, if you're just watching this at the without the audio, it's probably looking pretty crazy. But again, so that's kind of the goal. If you're starting here from step 1, you're going to move that glucose into the blood. Not a problem. You will kind of deplete here a little bit, but then you would eat some glucose. Again, the MB is the intestine. That glucose would go into the blood, and then from the blood, it would go back into that muscle. So then we can look at this, and this is kind of what would happen. It would go from, let's say, potentially half empty. Let's say you ate enough, then it would go down to, let's say only a quarter empty, right? And then if you trained again, probably something like this would happen. It would deplete a little bit. Same thing would happen again. You would have to eat food, whatever. So again, that kind of helps, I think, from a visual to see how that works out. Let me delete all that so it's not super confusing. Okay, so now let's kind of go into how we go about doing that from a practical application of getting enough carbohydrates as we expend energy. Okay, so this is a really good kind of, I think, algorithm to kind of show the importance and practical application of what we want on a general scale, and then we get into a specific scale a little bit later. So again, start with the left side of this, which would be if you're going to train only once in 24 hours. So again, that little diagram that I just showed, that little presentation I just showed, again, the importance of you consuming carbohydrate is always dictated on how frequently you're training. Okay, so we kind of showed that graphic of you deplete glycogen and then you need to refill it, but you only really need to refill it before the next time you train. Okay, so common sense says the more frequently you train, the more aggressive you're going to have to be with the timing of those carbohydrates. Okay, so we start over here with a training one time in 24 hours, which is going to be most people most of the time. So for those people, the total daily carbohydrate, CHO, just stands for carbohydrate, is going to be normally enough to replenish glycogen. Okay, again, I'm saying normally enough, not always enough, because it depends on your training. If you're doing like high intensity intervals and lifting weights, that can kind of get iffy as far as that goes. But for most training sessions, your total daily carbs, as long as this total number is high enough, which kind of goes in a different tangent, but as long as you're on a moderately high carb diet, which I recommend you should be, that total amount should be enough to replenish your glycogen, and you won't really risk falling into this area over here where you have that performance decrement. Okay, and then as far as the type of those carbohydrates, you generally want to have low fiber carbohydrates 1 to 2 hours before you train. Okay, so I don't really have this anywhere, I don't think. So let me just kind of type this out somewhere. So what we have kind of want to avoid, let me check if I actually do have that. Nope, I don't think I do anywhere. So we want to kind of avoid here fat and fiber. is not working out for me. Okay, so right here, in general, fat and fiber are going to sit in your stomach and not be absorbed and not be digested as quickly as non-fibrous carbohydrates and even protein. So fat, again, being the most dense macronutrient, that makes sense. And also fiber not really being broken down by our bodies, that also makes sense. It's not easily broken down, so it's going to take a lot longer to get to your large intestine and be fermented and all that stuff. So we generally want to limit both of those, fat and fiber, before we train, because it's going to sit in our stomachs and not get broken down as fast. Again, so when we're talking about, back to that graphic of those carbohydrates moving into the blood and then getting in your muscle cell, the slower that process is, it's going to kind of work to your detriment, especially if you're in this kind of depleted state. You want those to be full or filling up as quickly as possible, okay? So generally we want low fiber carbohydrates 1 to 2 hours before we train, just to ensure that we're topping ourselves off with glycogen. Okay, and then again, as far as timing, and this is also with some amount, I usually say the minimum of 10% of your daily carbs should be before you train. Again, that's not a black and white rule. It really kind of depends on, again, are you maxed out with your glycogen? But again, that's a pretty like soft rule you can use to ensure that. So again, if you're 10%, 300 grams of carbs, that would be 30 grams of carbs before you train as a minimum, okay, not a maximum. Most people do a lot more than that, whether it's out of habit or rather bro science or whatever. Most people just eat a lot more carbohydrates before they train. So again, I think 10% you're probably fine, again, assuming that they're low fiber and your total daily intake is enough. If you're on a low carb diet, this is kind of all a moot point. So okay, then we're moving on to the right, which is the training twice in 24 hours. So again, we talked about you're going to have to be more diligent if you're in this category than if you're training once in 24 hours, because you just have less total time to refill those glycogen stores to perform at a high level. Okay, so again, same factors here, same little subcategories. The total daily carbs, normally not enough to replenish glycogen, because again, you're probably going to be needing to specifically consume some certain carbohydrates and also time it to get maximally saturated. So that alone is not enough. Again, that's kind of what this means. Usually this alone tends to be fine, but for 2 days usually is not fine, okay? So then with actual the carbohydrate types we need, okay, we kind of want those low fiber, high GI still is the 1 time per training, but it's a little bit more important as far as how often, okay? So like we have this pre-workout 1, we definitely want those, but then also that post-workout 1, and then also for the pre-workout 2, okay? So I kind of have a guideline that I can give you guys, but again, you kind of want to overly simplistically think about it, surround your training bouts with the low fiber, high GI carbohydrates, because again, going back to this, if you're half empty going into your session, you want this glucose from this blood to get in to that muscle cell as quickly as possible. And again, the fiber in those foods is going to slow that process down. So you want to get that done really quickly. And then say after you train, so this is actually your pre-workout here, right? Then hopefully you get here before you trained, and then you might be back here after you trained. You need to get back here before you train the second time, right? So this can also be, you know, the pre-workout recommendations are almost the exact same as a post-workout recommendation, because you're in that same state. You need to refill glycogen to perform well. You break it down. You need to do that again before you can train again. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And then again, with the timing, same kind of thing there. I say a minimum of 10%. And again, to make it simple, you can just go 10% before you train, 10% after you train, and then 10% before you train the second time. Again, so it kind of can get confusing with the pre and the post, but really they should not be terribly different. If you're training twice a day, the foods you're wanting to consume pre-workout and post-workout should nearly be identical, because you kind of want the same things to happen, especially from a carbohydrate front, low fiber, high GI, and a good amount of them, especially with 2-a-day training, because your total carbs for that day will probably be much higher than they were for 1 hour per day. Okay. So again, hopefully this kind of graphic makes sense. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can always email me, especially if you're one of my clients. Okay, so again, kind of ignore this wadding here. This can just be workout. Because it's, again, for most people I work with, this is going to be true. So again, the general idea here, low fat, high carb, and again, also being low fiber, high carb, and then moderate protein. I tend to stick away from actual like size recommendations because it is highly dependent upon, just how much food you like to train with, in your stomach, and certainly the size of the person. 130-pound female is not going to need the same or even want to consume as much as a 180-pound male. Again, so I usually say about 100 to 400 calories per hour away from training. That's a huge range, probably not even worth telling people about. But again, you kind of go if you're a really small person, going on the small side of that. If you're a big person, going on the big side of that. If you're a moderate person, going kind of somewhere in the middle. So for me, about 180 pounds, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. So if I'm going to eat an hour before I train, maybe 250 total carbs, and then again, just doing the math, 2 hours before I train, be about 500 calories, sorry, not carbs. Then 3 hours after I trained, eating 3 hours before I trained, 200 or 750 calories. Again, kind of common sense, but the further you are away from that training session, the bigger you want that meal to be. The closer you are to that session, the smaller the meal you want to be. Okay. And then again, kind of talked about this timing, 1 hour usually, 1 to 2 hours before you train, if you're training 1 hour per session. Okay. And actually going into some meal examples here. So we have one for 155 pounds and one for 205. So again, this is going to be a lot of women and a lot of dudes. These are kind of just decent examples here. But you'll always have to kind of look at what fits into your diet there as far as what your macro numbers are, and needs to make sense with that. If you're a woman in this range, you're only eating 80 grams of carbs, it's probably not going to make a lot of sense to have 50 right before you train, because the rest of your day is going to be very hard to adhere to. So use these as guidelines, and again, always use that kind of 10% number, both pre and post training is a good starting place. Okay, but you see the general trends. We'll start over here with the 155. Again, we want from here, low fat, high carb, moderate protein. So low fat, 0 to 10 grams. Again, I'd probably shoot closer to this, like 0 to 5 is good, but you're going to have probably some just residue fat in there. It's going to be really hard to have like a 2-gram fat meal. Again, high carb, 30 to 50. For someone at 155, that's probably going to be a really big portion of their carbs, probably more than 10%. And then 20 to 30 grams of protein. Again, for someone that size, it's probably just another meal for them, maybe a little bit on the low side as far as general meals. But again, for the most part, it can just be a typical lunch, typical breakfast, typical dinner size protein source. Okay, and these are actually some good examples here. So again, you can kind of ignore the protein sources. Those are really just for full understanding of what you would have with that meal, because we wouldn't just eat like a potato. We would just eat pancakes. We would eat kind of a variety of foods with it. So in general here, though, this one medium white potato will give you at 30 to 50 grams of carbs. Over here, we have 3/4 cup of spaghetti. Could also get you that. And then 2 small pancakes with some light or calorie-free syrup could also get you that. And again, you see the protein sources tend to be low fat. 93.7 beef, maybe pushing it up there. I think that's 8 grams of fat per serving. That's kind of high there. But the tuna, low fat. One egg would be about 5 grams of fat, but then the egg whites would be also fat-free. So you're looking, this would be about 8 grams, probably about maybe 1 on the tuna, and then 5 here. So always keeping it low fat there. Then over here on the right, same kind of concept. It's just going to be more food because the person is bigger and probably consuming more total calories in the day. And also you see the difference here. This just has a lean meat and a low fiber carb. This has a lean meat, a low fiber carb, and a small amount of fat. Again, that's just because they can probably tolerate more total food, and they just don't want to have too many maybe they're not going to be able to hit their fat grams if they're only having a meal with like 3 grams of fat in it. Okay, so it gets a little bit higher here, 5 to 15. That's still not a ton of fat for someone that weighs 205 pounds. You know, I can't really do anything off the top of my head, but it's probably not uncommon for someone, even on a diet that we prescribe, to be 60 to 85 grams of fat per day at 205. So 5 to 15 is still pretty dang low relative to their total goal for that day. And then 40 to 70 grams of carbohydrate. So again, just a little bit higher there, and they have some more wiggle room there just because, again, they're bigger, consuming more food, they can be more flexible. And same thing with the protein. That's a typical size protein meal for most 205ers. Okay, so again, I just kind of switch up the food sources here just to give you guys some more examples, but by no means could these people not eat these foods too. They would still be perfectly fine. But again, so here, a little bit more of the protein source, 5 ounces as opposed to 4. 5 ounces of either, lean turkey or chicken breast or whey. So again, ground turkey may have 8 grams of fat, the chicken probably 2 or 3, and the whey maybe 1 or 2. And then again, the big carbohydrate source, there's going to be low fiber, white rice, sweet potato, toast. And then you see a little bit of fat with this. So again, for the chicken breast, you would have almost no fat in this. So again, you add about 10 grams of olive oil, will get you up to that 10 gram mark. With that sweet potato, you can just put 1 tablespoon of like light butter. So that's probably going to give you somewhere between, maybe 5 grams of fat in that, with 8 from the ground turkey, which puts you about 13 in kind of the high end there. And again, whey protein should have very little, maybe just a couple of grams. Plus the peanut butter will probably give you about 15-ish. So again, kind of on that high end there. But yeah, that's sort of just general stuff there, kind of how I'd lay it out. These are not special things by any means. It's just one example of what you can do. And then on this last slide here, we have, again, just I think really easy to digest this stuff. As far as on the left, most of the time going to be your good options, and on the right, most of the time not going to be so great options. I did have this down here too. So fat and fiber, slow digestion, not ideal pre-workout. So mention that somewhere. So again, this is just kind of really cool to screenshot, to kind of have this list. This isn't a huge list by any means, but just kind of the typical stuff that people eat, how I would put them in here. But again, you can always add to these as you would like. If it's a lean meat or if it's a lean meat, you can have it. If it's a low fiber carb, you can have it. Those are kind of the only good rules to live by. These are some good examples. I won't read all of these off because you guys can read. And then I do have some asterisks I want to kind of just clear up. So let's start over here with the white potato and sweet potato. So these will have a little bit of carbohydrates, a little bit of fiber with those carbohydrates, but they tend to be tolerated pretty well by most people I know that train. So that's one of those things where the concept is pretty low fiber, so something like white rice or a pancake or bread would be, like white bread even, would be a little bit better. But in practice, it seems like people really respond well to the white potatoes, sweet potatoes. So again, these aren't super high fiber foods. They're not oatmeal, they're not berries, they're not vegetables. So there's probably a continuum on how much fiber each person can tolerate and not really have any issues there. So I wouldn't shy away from the potatoes because they have a little bit of fiber in them. But still, even a decent sized potato with like 40 grams of carbohydrate is probably only going to have 3 or 4 grams of fiber. So it's not super high. And then over here on this not so good option, again, any green vegetable I have down there, but also understand that the devil is also in the dose with that one. So, if you have, one of the typical meals that I laid out there, and then like you add in 1/4 of a cup of broccoli, like that's almost going to be no amount of calories or fiber that's really going to even need to be digested and broken down that much. So it's probably not going to slow down the process. So if you're wanting to add these vegetables in, just make sure they're in a low quantity that you don't really need to take a lot of time to break them down and to have them sit in your stomach. So You can keep the really high volume amount of vegetables and fruits, high fiber stuff to either after you train or just not pre-training, as long as you're training once a day. If you're training twice a day, of course, then have it just not around your training at all. So if you're gonna have like half a cup, full cup of vegetables, something like that, I would really recommend keeping that away from pre-workout and post-workout if you're going to train again in that day. I think this last slide isn't really that super helpful. I think it's going to give some other stuff around here as far as what I'd recommend, but that's more of a total day intake. So hopefully this video is kind of helpful. Again, I really wanted to make this for a lot of my online clients to have just a conceptual idea of why and what I recommend pre-workout. Again, this kind of takes care of the carbohydrate needs. I think this is actually more complex than the protein needs, even though that seems to get a lot more buzz and more hype. But I definitely think, I don't think, carbohydrate is much more essential to transient exercise performance than protein is. Protein is certainly important on a long-term scale of repairing muscle tissue. That's not really happening really quickly, and you're not really going to see I don't think you would see a decrease in performance from a lack of protein in a day or two. But if you didn't have enough carbohydrates in a day or two, you could certainly see at least a quicker drop in performance. So it's a little bit more just time demanding as far as that goes of its importance. So hopefully this kind of graph I showed at the beginning, it's not a graph, this kind of flow image that I showed you guys, idea of kind of how it works in our bodies really helps you guys understand the necessity of why we're doing it. Yeah, again, if you guys have any questions about stuff that I said, maybe it wasn't super clear. This is actually my first time trying this and doing this, so hopefully it made a lot of sense. And yeah, so if you're a client, for sure let me know if you have any questions. And also just put this up on the YouTubes for free, so people have a little taste of it and just have a better understanding for why we do what we do. So thanks as always, guys. Again, if you don't know me and what we do, this is Greg Ferris, and you can go check out more stuff at myobrainperformance.com. Always shoot me an email at myobraincoaching@gmail.com. Thanks, guys.